For centuries, the Plains Indians, nations like the Lakota, Cheyenne, Comanche, and Crow, ruled vast stretches of North America's interior. Mounted on horses and armed with centuries of knowledge of the land, they hunted bison, waged war, traded, and lived in deeply spiritual societies tied to the rhythms of nature. But by the late 1800s, this world was gone. What had once been a civilization built on speed, strategy, and spiritual power was reduced to starvation, confinement, and silence. The collapse wasn't gradual, it was a brutal, fast-moving disintegration marked by betrayal, violence, and cultural extermination. The rise of the Plains warriors. The horse, introduced by the Spanish, changed everything. By the 1700s, tribes like the Comanche and Lakota had transformed into formidable mounted powers, able to strike and vanish across the open prairie. The buffalo provided food, shelter, clothing, and tools. Life revolved around the hunt and the camp, the seasons and the sun. Intertribal warfare was common, but so was trade and diplomacy. Despite European encroachment on the coasts, the vast plains remained largely independent indigenous territory well into the 19th century. Manifest destiny and the clash of civilizations. That autonomy ended with the expansionist ideology of manifest destiny. The U.S. government viewed the Great Plains as empty land, ready for settlement, railroads, and resource extraction. But to do that, the indigenous people had to be removed. Treaties were signed, then broken. Promises were made, then ignored. Settlers, railways, and soldiers pushed deeper into native lands. The Plains tribes, who had held their own against Mexican armies and rival nations, now faced a far more organized and unrelenting threat: the U.S. federal government backed by industrial power. Genocide by another name. The collapse of the Plains tribes was not accidental. It was deliberate and devastating. Bison extermination. Tens of millions of buffalo were slaughtered in just a few decades, not for meat but to deprive tribes of their lifeblood. U.S. officials openly stated this was a strategy to break indigenous resistance. Military campaigns, brutal scorched earth tactics were used. Villages were burned, horses and supplies seized, women and children killed. Notable massacres like Sand Creek 1864 and Washita 1868 shocked even some in the U.S. Army. Relocation and starvation. Tribes were forced onto reservations, often desolate, infertile lands far from ancestral homes. Promised rations rarely came and corruption was rampant. Starvation, disease, and despair followed. Cultural suppression. Ceremonies were outlawed. Children were taken to boarding schools where they were beaten for speaking their language or practicing their traditions. The last stands. There were heroic acts of resistance. The Battle of Little Bighorn 1876, where Lakota and Cheyenne warriors annihilated Custer's forces, was a stunning but short-lived victory. The Nez Perce Flight of 1877, under Chief Joseph, showcased both brilliant strategy and human tragedy. The Ghost Dance movement, a desperate spiritual revival promising the return of the buffalo and the dead, ended in the horrific Wounded Knee Massacre of 1890, where over 250 Lakota, many of them women and children, were slaughtered. These moments marked the end of armed resistance on the plains. What was lost? The collapse of the Plains tribes wasn't just military, it was civilizational. A way of life based on harmony with the land, oral tradition, spiritual ritual, and communal living was violently dismantled. The people who had once ridden freely across the horizon now lived in poverty, trauma, and systemic neglect. Children no longer learned their language. Ceremonies went underground. Elders died without passing on their wisdom. And the land, once teeming with bison and thunder, went silent under barbed wire and railroads. A legacy of survival. And yet, the Plains peoples endured. Today, many native nations are reviving their languages, ceremonies, and sovereignty. They fight for environmental justice, land rights, and recognition. While the collapse was terrifying and complete in its time, it did not destroy the spirit of the Plains tribes. They are still here. The story of the Plains Indians is not just one of tragedy, it's a story of resistance, resilience, and renewal. But it's also a stark reminder of what happens when greed, racism, and empire crush cultures in their path. The silence of the bison herds, the abandoned lodges, the blood-stained soil, all tell of a collapse that should never be forgotten. History may have tried to erase them, but the memory of the Plains peoples galloping across the grasslands, proud, fierce, and free, will never die.